4.1 Ethics and Legal Issues. So what does ethical and legal mean? So ethics are moral principles that decide a person's behaviour or when they are conducting an activity. So if they are morally right, they do what's right and not what's legally right. They do what they think is right. So that's their morals. Legal is where they're going by the law and they have to do this. If they don't go by the law, it can cause problems within their own lives, and these are rules that are set by the government themselves. So, historical events. So, the first one is Helsinki in 1964. So, Helsinki, they are a set of ethical principles to human environments. So, these are moral principles, how people act around others. The next one is Nuremberg in 1947. So, there are 10 key points to the Nuremberg Code. The gift consent has to have purpose, avoid physical and mental damage, the problem solving shouldn't be done if there is a chance of death, prepared, so they need to be organised, so subject needs to be known they can end the experiment at will, experts responsible for health, subject told methods, and they need to be conducted by experts. So these are very rough guidelines, and these are still used now, but there's more than this nowadays. So, what started all this is the Nazi experiments in World War II, in the 1940s. So, the Nazis, they captured soldiers from the war, and they did experiments on them, such as taking them into high altitudes, and taking the oxygen away from them, and put them in different temperatures, so cold temperature and hot temperature areas and environments. So they did this to try and help them be able to understand what happens to the body at these temperatures. It improved our scientific knowledge of this, but they did it in a inhumane way, and it's ethically very wrong and was legally wrong too. So BASES. BASES stands for British Association of Sport and Exercise Science. So they're a professional body for sport and exercise science in the UK, and they give you accreditation of what they are, who they are. So Zimbardo did a study on people, putting them into a prison, but they didn't tell them that what they were going to do. So this is deception, and he was lying to them, which is again against their ethical, and it's very morally wrong. They put the prisoners through terrible conditions, making them continue without stopping. So they weren't allowed to stop, they didn't have the right to withdraw at all, and they didn't have consent. So they could only stop until they mentally were broken down and they were physically harmed. So this is again against ethics and very morally wrong, and legally it was right. It was alright in those days, in the 1970s, but modern day now it wouldn't happen. So Milgram also, he done a test on people, and they sat them down in a chair, and they thought someone was opposite in the room with a heart wired up to electrics. So, and the person that was on the other side controlling the electrics had to flip the switch each time they heard someone scream, and they were tested to see how far they would go until they stopped, and most of them went all the way through and did this. But fortunately, the person on the other side was a recording of the same sound each time, so they also were deceived, and this was not good for the participants, but it was good for the research as it was beneficial towards them. So, ethical and legal considerations. So, bases. So this is one of them. As I've spoken, they are a professional body and they give you accreditation. So, Institute Ethics and Review Committee. They are used to monitor and review any experiments that are going on. Ethical clearance. You are cleared and allowed to take action further if you have clearance. You have to give them they'll either allow it, you say you have to develop it, or you're not allowed to do it at all. You have to get it to any research you do. To the risk-benefit analysis, benefits are you have to tell the participant the risks, but then balance it out with the benefits and the outcomes. The ethical volunteers, they are not peer pressured into it, and they are not allowed to be paid and bribed. It's informed consent. So understand the experience and why they are doing it, the risks they are taking, and if they're under the age of 18, their parents have to sign it too, as they are not legally allowed to under the age of 18. So they need to know the right to withdraw, so they change your mind at any time to stop participation. They need to do the health screening questionnaire to check suitability of the participant. Participant disclaimer, understand health risks and hazards. Equality and plurality, not biased, and has to be fair, and has to be within the rights of research. Research responsibility, behave professionally responsibly for your own and others, health and others, and neutral attitude towards them. Deception, not allowed to tell them the wrong information. Health and safety, making a risk assessment to check if there are any dangers and what they're going to do to prevent them. Confidentiality, anonymity, not allowed to be published, and they're not allowed to use their names, and if they are allowed to publish. Data protection, they have to protect any data that is found during the experiment and not allowed to be posted on the internet. And the scientific misconduct is, they're not allowed to be biased, again, and they're not allowed to ignore any results that they found in this test. So they are the considerations. So the consequences of not working ethically and legally. So ethical training. So this is when they have to check if they are ethically correct, and if they're not, then they have to go through a certain training. So the law prison sentence. If a researcher goes against the rules of law, he could face a prison sentence. Reprimand or suspension. If you get suspended, you have potential losing your job, and you have to go to a court hearing to see if you do lose your job or not. And if you do, you will lose your accreditation too, as I will talk about in a minute. So physical harm, if you are harmed injury or more seriously, leading to fatal injuries. Emotional harm is if their emotions are changed throughout of the experiment or made worse, making them unstable, they have to stop. Fines, so that if they are breaking any rules, you will get fined. Professional and research credibility. So when you become a researcher, you get credibility by bases or other organisations, and if you lose this, you aren't able to do any further research and lose your basis accreditation, for example. So basis accreditation is you have to apply for this, and they will give it to you if you go within the guidelines, and this makes you more known as a researcher. So scenario 1, an investigation to see how much CO2 is output during a Wingate test on a young cyclist. So the considerations, so they need to get a CRB check because they're working with young participants, and a health screening questionnaire as well. So they did not do this with the participant, so this is bad practice for them, and this could have caused a lot of physical and emotional harm towards him, the cyclist, as he could have had problems with his lungs or heart, He knew the right to withdraw. That he had got consent from the parents and understand the methods. The deception, they did not lie to the participant, so he was voluntary. They got ethical clearance. They needed to get ethical clearance, in which they did. So there's a risk-benefit analysis as well. So they got told the risks and now knows the benefits as well. And the data protection and confidentiality, so no data was released. So the consequences of not doing these, so as he didn't get the health screening questionnaire, he could have caused physical and emotional harm, and this could have caused fines and maybe even suspension for the researcher. So scenario 2 is an experiment where the athlete has to run for as long as possible during a submaximal level and measure the oxygen intake and the CO2 the output compared ratios of CO2 and oxygen. So the considerations are they have to be voluntary, whether they're not bribed or they are paid to do this. The participants' disclaimer, they know why they're doing it, the risks, the methods, and if they want to do it. So equality and plurality, they're not allowed to be biased towards them, saying that you're not doing good at all or you're doing really, really well, giving them too much confidence. So the researcher has responsibility to make sure they are staying healthy and not causing damage to them. And scientific misconduct, if they find something, an anomaly, they are not allowed to ignore this result. And they have ignored some of the results. So ethical training, they need a consequence could be ethical training, law prison sentence, so they were sent to jail for a certain amount of time, professional and research credibility and basis accreditation taken away from them as they have not gone by the guidelines. A researcher does an experiment to measure the blood lactate during a increase in physical exertion to monitor the increase of lactate and they have to take blood. So they need to do a health screening questionnaire to make sure they are able to do this. There needs to be data protection. They need to get definitely informed consent as they're taking blood. The right to withdraw if they are feeling bad at any time, they can stop it. And they have to be competent to do this. So if they're not competent, they will cause physical harm to them as they're taking blood. If they do it wrong, they could cause harm to the participant, and therefore causing fine, suspension, and again, they may lose their basis accreditation, which is very important to them as this gives them helps them be a researcher. So the final scenario, an experiment adult to see what the effects are to the athlete's performance if they have a stable diet. So they need to have a participant disclaimer, they can't be biased towards them. So they need to know what they're doing and why. They need to be voluntary, they can't lie to them saying that it's going to definitely work, and the researcher's responsibility. And he did not do this as he did not carry out a health screening questionnaire. So this can cause reprimand or suspension, physical harm, because if he was allergic to any foods they give him, then this will cause them damage. And emotional harm. So there's fines that could have been given, and therefore their professional credibility taken away from them, and they will not be known as a researcher because as they will know that they've caused harm to others around them. So this is my 4.1 ethics and legal issues.